She signed Hollywood's first studio contract for a black actress, then vanished from the credits of over 50 films. Her grave is nearly invisible, but her legacy shaped generations. So, why did the industry bury her name while building empires on her work? This is the real story of Madame Sul-Te-Wan. Born from chains and raised on dreams, she was born as Nellie Crawford in Louisville, Kentucky, in the year 1873. Her arrival into the world came less than a decade after the end of slavery in America, but her family's roots were still tangled deep in it. Both of her parents had been born enslaved, carrying the weight of survival long before she took her first breath. To make it worse, her father, Silas, disappeared early in her life and left the responsibility of raising her entirely on the shoulders of her mother, Cleon DeLonda. Cleon worked as a laundress, scrubbing, folding, and steaming clothes for women who had the kind of lives most Black Americans at the time couldn't even dream of. Cleon's clients were white stage actresses who performed in Louisville's finer theaters. These weren't just any women. They were the ones who wore layers of silks, corsets that needed assistance to fasten, and dramatic makeup that glittered under gaslight. These women demanded elegance and presentation, and Cleon kept them pristine. But Cleon didn't always leave Nellie at home. Sometimes she brought her daughter with her. Those laundry deliveries turned into something more. The backstage doors cracked open, and little Nellie peeked into a world filled with velvet curtains, heavy jewelry, and women who transformed completely under the heat of a spotlight. That was where Nellie first saw something that didn't look like survival. It looked like power. The kind of power that didn't come from shouting or fighting, but from being seen, from commanding a room by simply walking into it in costume and character. And for a little black girl in post-Reconstruction Kentucky, that was something she had never witnessed before. The actresses noticed her wide eyes and her barely contained energy. They saw how she lit up while watching rehearsals and how she quietly mimicked the way performers moved across the stage. Some of these actresses were women who understood that the theater, at its core, was about transformation, so they offered her a shot at something small but life-changing. Two of the actresses, Mary Anderson and Fanny Davenport, used their influence to get her into a local talent contest. It was the kind of event meant to amuse, maybe scout new faces, but rarely included Black contestants. Nellie entered with little more than natural rhythm and fearless charm. She danced, moved like someone twice her age, and had that spark in her eyes that made it impossible to ignore her. She won. The applause that rang out that day was the first time she ever felt what it was like to be seen not just as a child or as Black or as poor, but as a performer. That moment wasn't a fluke. It was her opening scene. After that contest, she started performing in small community shows, finding every opportunity to stay in front of an audience. But Nellie had no intention of staying where the world expected her to. She was paying attention. Every costume she saw, every stage cue, every lighting change, she watched and learned. Her brain was absorbing stagecraft while others thought she was just folding linen or sitting off to the side. She was young, but she was already building something inside herself. Her mother's world was one of soap, water, and service. Nellie's vision stretched beyond that. She didn't want to wait on actresses. She wanted to be one. She didn't want to be told what she could do. She wanted to decide. That idea, at the time, was dangerous, because the rules for Black women in the 19th century were clear. Be quiet, be useful, don't expect more. Nellie ignored all of it. She kept her dream alive in places where it wasn't supposed to survive. She kept performing wherever she could. Small theaters, community spaces, parlor shows, any venue that would have her. Her energy became her reputation. Audiences remembered her, even if they didn't remember her name yet. Word spread that this girl from Louisville was going to be someone. People started whispering about her performances. She had something. She was something. Still, her world was limited by geography, race, and money. Kentucky wasn't the kind of place that could build the career she wanted. It could light the match, but it couldn't keep the fire going. She needed to get out, to grow, to transform again, this time not just as a performer, but as a professional. Creole Nell and the East Coast Hustle. So, she and her mother packed up and moved to Cincinnati. It wasn't Hollywood, but it was a bigger city with more theaters, more shows, and more chances to turn performance into something real. In Cincinnati, she joined a touring theater group called the Three Black Cloaks. It was a bold and mysterious name, and the group was exactly the kind of opportunity Nellie needed. This wasn't laundry deliveries or watching from the wings anymore. She was on stage, in costume, memorizing lines and traveling from town to town. It was here that she decided to take on a new name. She called herself Creole Nell. The name rolled off the tongue and had a sense of style, a little flair that made her stand out on posters and in playbills. It gave her room to create a character that felt glamorous and intriguing, especially at a time when black actresses weren't even given full names in most stage listings. Touring with the Three Black Cloaks gave her the basics. It taught her how to perform for different crowds, how to adjust when a piano went out, how to hold attention even in towns where the theater was more of a side act than the main event. But over time, she got tired of taking direction from other people. She wasn't interested in being told when to perform or what to say. So, in a move that was rare for black women at the time, she started her own performance company. She named it the Black 400. That name wasn't random. It was a play on the term the 400, which was used in New York high society to describe the wealthiest, most elite families. Nellie flipped it. Her company wasn't built on money or privilege. It was built on talent, hustle, and showmanship. She cast her own people, booked her own venues, wrote her own acts, and hit the road. This was a one-woman production empire running long before anyone was calling it that. Managing a traveling troupe was no easy task. You weren't just organizing shows. You had to feed the cast, find places to sleep, deal with stagehands who didn't want to work with black performers, and calm egos when personalities clashed. Nellie did it all while performing center stage night after night. Each night they went on stage. They were proving that black performers could fill seats, bring crowds, and entertain with elegance. And they did. The group toured up and down the East Coast, bringing musical numbers, dance routines, dramatic skits, and comedy to cities that weren't used to seeing black-led productions at that level. As the years passed, she rebranded the troupe as the Rareback Minstrels. The new name leaned into vaudeville style and gave them more flexibility with format. They could shift between musical theater and traveling comedy depending on the crowd. It made booking easier and opened more doors. Nellie knew how to evolve. She wasn't chasing trends. She was staying ahead of them. Every booking was a negotiation. She had to fight for fair payment, fair treatment, and fair billing. At a time when most venues were owned by white businessmen who barely tolerated black performers, she had to speak clearly and stand her ground. And she did, over and over again. Her talent extended beyond the curtain call as she also became known for her business sense. She was the one figuring out how many tickets needed to sell to make it to the next city. She was the one handling cash at the end of the night. She made sure the shows were professional, polished, and profitable. She could read a room before stepping into it. She knew when to switch a dramatic piece to comedy, when to add an encore, when to smooth over a backstage disagreement to keep the night on track. She had instincts that most producers would kill for, and she had the guts to back them up. Most black performers at the time were stuck in a loop, taking scraps, hoping for applause, moving from one short-term gig to another. But Nellie was creating something long-term, something with a name, a face, and a presence. She was giving herself, and others in her troupe, a career. Soon, her name started to carry weight. Theater owners knew who she was. Audience members remembered her routines. Performers wanted to work with her. Creole Nell had gone from being a teenage dancer with a dream to a recognized performer and producer, carving out her own lane. But even with all her success, she knew she couldn't stay in the same orbit forever. The East Coast gave her a foundation, but she needed something bigger. Theaters had limits. Cinema was rising. And on the other side of the country, a brand new world of silent film was being born. That control would be tested in California, where her stage lights dimmed and life hit harder than ever before. Abandonment in Arcadia. By 1910, the world of motion pictures was growing fast out west, and California wasn't just about palm trees and orange groves anymore. It was becoming the beating heart of a brand new kind of storytelling. So when she married Robert Conley and moved to Arcadia, California, she believed it was a step forward, a way to blend her stage experience into this rising film industry. California looked like a place where anything could happen. The sun was always shining, and for performers it seemed like the next natural destination. But the fantasy broke faster than expected. Not long after their move, Nellie gave birth to her third son. She was still recovering, still adjusting to motherhood all over again when everything collapsed. Just 3 weeks after that baby was born, Robert vanished. No warning, no explanation. One day she was married with plans, and the next she was alone with 3 small children and no money. There was no safety net. There was no family nearby who could step in. She had moved her life across the country for a man who disappeared at the most vulnerable moment. With no income and mouths to feed, she turned to charity. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. She took whatever work she could find. Most of it came in the form of domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes for wealthier families in the area. It wasn't what she had envisioned when she left the East Coast. The shows, the makeup, the spotlight, all of it felt far away now. Still, she didn't stop performing. If there was a church event, a local fundraiser, or a community gathering that needed entertainment, she stepped up. She still had that spark inside her. No matter how heavy things got at home, she kept finding ways to keep her passion alive. It wasn't for fame, it was for sanity. Performing reminded her who she was, even if the world didn't seem to care anymore. This chapter of her life didn't come with applause. There was no audience clapping as she scrubbed floors or rocked crying babies at night. There were no playbills with her name on them. Just long days, unpaid bills, and a constant pressure to hold everything together for her kids. But even in that space, she started watching. California had something that the East Coast didn't: film sets. And once she realized they were closer than she thought, the fire came back. She started asking around, learning who was filming what and where. Studio lots were beginning to pop up across Los Angeles County. Some of the biggest directors in the country were working out of barns and makeshift studios, trying to invent an art form that was still brand new. It was rough, experimental, and open to whoever could push their way in. She had no formal resume for film, but she had more than enough grit. One name kept coming up: D.W. Griffith. He was already building a reputation for shooting ambitious films with sweeping sets and massive casts. Rumor had it he was working on a new movie, and he was shooting scenes not far from her neighborhood. That was all she needed to hear. Nellie had waited long enough. If no one was going to hand her a role, she'd go knock on the door herself. Some versions of the story say she showed up wearing a bright red turban, gold earrings, and long braids that shimmered in the sunlight. Others say she wrote him a letter, reminding him that she was from Louisville, just like he was. Either way, she made sure she couldn't be ignored. She was telling them they'd be making a mistake if they didn't look her way. This moment wasn't just bold, it was strategic. She had 3 children to care for, and acting wasn't a dream anymore. It was a necessity. She knew she couldn't rely on temporary jobs forever. And performing wasn't just what she was good at, it was what she was meant to do. The risk worked. That bold move toward Griffith's production would lead to something no other black actress had done at the time. But standing at the edge of that opportunity, she wasn't thinking about making history, she was thinking about making rent. The industry she was trying to enter was closed off in almost every way. Roles for black performers were scarce, and when they existed, they were often insulting, silent, or stereotyped. But she didn't have the luxury to wait for the system to get better. She had to walk through whatever door was open, even if it was only cracked an inch. Every step she had taken, from the laundromats of Louisville to the churches in California, had prepared her for this. It wasn't glamorous. There were no elegant costumes this time. Just a mother with no safety net and a refusal to be invisible. The film she entered was deeply flawed, but the opportunity it gave her changed her life forever. The Griffith Breakthrough. The movie was called The Birth of a Nation. Crowds were starting to gather near the filming locations. Extras were being hired by the dozen. In a city still figuring out what movies were supposed to be, this one already felt larger than life. She started out earning $3 a day. For someone with no film credits and no agent, that was more than a lifeline. It was proof that she could get in the room. Soon after, the $3 gig turned into a studio contract. $25 a week. A steady paycheck, a camera crew, a place in the movie. She wasn't given a starring role. Her name wouldn't be in the opening credits. But Griffith had originally planned something bigger for her. There was a scene, reportedly, where she would play a wealthy black landowner walking through town. When a white woman insulted her, she was supposed to spit in the woman's face, a rare moment of power written for a black character in a film made during that era. But censors stepped in. The scene was cut. She ended up placed in mob scenes, appearing on screen, but without the presence that the original role could have delivered. Even without that spotlight, she was now part of a historic production. Not for the right reasons, though. The Birth of a Nation went on to become one of the most controversial films in American history. It was celebrated for technical brilliance, but condemned for its racist narrative. It portrayed the Reconstruction era as chaos, glorified the Ku Klux Klan, and turned black characters into caricatures, or had white actors in blackface play them all together. It became a cinematic milestone and at the same time a tool of damage and division. For Nellie, the film was complicated. She knew what she was part of. The racism wasn't subtle, but there were no other films hiring black women on contract. Griffith's movie, flawed and harmful as it was, gave her something she couldn't get anywhere else: entry into the world of motion pictures. And it came at a cost. After the film's release, she found herself at the center of new controversy. Rumors spread that she had incited protests against the film's showing in Los Angeles. On top of that, someone accused her of stealing a book from a white actress. The charges were serious enough to get her fired from Griffith's production company. In that moment, everything she had fought for, the contract, the small space she had carved out, was slipping through her fingers. But she didn't stay quiet. She hired a black attorney named E. Burton Cerruti, one of the few African-American lawyers practicing in Los Angeles at the time. Together, they challenged the accusations in court. They didn't just defend her name, they dismantled the claims entirely. She won her case, cleared her reputation, and forced the industry to pay attention again. The win didn't erase the damage, but it reopened the door. Griffith brought her back. This time, she was hired for Intolerance, his next epic film, another historical project, another ensemble cast. The roles still weren't large, but she was in front of the camera again. She was back on the payroll. And most importantly, she became the first black woman in Hollywood to hold a studio contract. It wasn't given to her out of kindness. She earned it through strategy, timing, and an unshakable belief that she belonged on screen. But the contract was just the beginning. To truly stand out, she needed a new name, a name no one could ignore or shorten. The creation of Madame Sul-Te-Wan. Some names are given, some are inherited, but Madame Sul-Te-Wan, that one was created, carefully, intentionally, and without explanation. After earning her place on a Hollywood set, Nellie Crawford knew she needed more than just talent to survive. She had already fought her way into the room, but staying there required something else. She couldn't show up with the same name she used back when she was folding laundry with her mother. The film industry was built on image, illusion, and hierarchy. Names mattered. No one ever recorded the moment she made the switch. There's no paper trail, no old interview, no diary entry where she writes out her reasoning. And strangely, no one ever asked her. Not her peers, not the press, not even years later when her name began showing up in cast lists and programs. She became Madame Sul-Te-Wan, and that was that. People accepted it like a mystery they were too afraid or too embarrassed to solve. But her silence spoke volumes. Some say she chose the name because it forced people to see her differently. Nellie was soft, familiar, easy to dismiss. The industry had a habit of calling black women by nicknames, Mammy, Auntie, or just by their first names, even in formal settings. But Madame Sul-Te-Wan, that wasn't a name anyone could shorten. It sounded royal. It demanded formality. It shifted the way casting agents and directors addressed her, even before she walked in the door. The name made her untouchable in a system that wanted to make her small. Historian Charlene Regester, who studied early black cinema deeply, believed the name was a strategic move. It hinted at more than black identity. It sounded exotic, a little foreign, like someone who could play East Indian, Native American, Spanish, or Creole characters. In a time when casting often ignored authenticity, actors who could blur racial lines got more roles. By creating a name with no clear origin, she opened up more doors, roles that went to others, not just black. The name didn't just protect her, it expanded her options. There's also a theory that her stage name was a nod to her father. Though her relationship with him was nearly non-existent, he was said to be a Hindu minister. Whether that story was true or not, it added another layer to the myth. Madame Sul-Te-Wan became a walking mystery, someone who belonged to no single category and could perform in many. Others think she simply wanted distance. Nellie reminded her of hard times, the backrooms, the rejection, the early struggles. She was reinventing herself the way great actors do, by becoming someone else entirely. She gave the new name power and purpose. It wasn't about hiding. It was about building a version of herself that could not be ignored. And the name worked. When it started appearing in cast lists, it stuck. No one questioned it. No one tried to correct it. She wasn't just Sul-Te-Wan. The Madam always came first, like a title. That small word made a huge difference. She wasn't introduced like a servant, she was introduced like a star. Even the press treated it with a certain distance. They printed it as is with capital letters and respect. At a time when many black performers were forced into roles with no credit, no title, and no real identity on screen, Madame Sul-Te-Wan was building her brand, quietly but powerfully. She used that name across multiple productions, and it became her signature. It didn't matter how small the role was. Once you saw that name on the call sheet, you knew who she was. You knew the presence she brought to the screen. Even if she only had a single line or a quick appearance, the name made sure you remembered her. The truth is, no one fully knows what she meant by Sul-Te-Wan. That was the point. It was hers. She owned it. She didn't explain it because she didn't have to. That mystery gave her power in an industry that stripped so many black performers of control. She created a name that couldn't be mispronounced into a slur, couldn't be shortened into disrespect, and couldn't be erased from casting sheets without looking ridiculous. But the new persona didn't guarantee meaningful roles. What followed was a filmography full of work, but light on dignity. Decades of stereotypes. One woman's endurance. She showed up on screen more than 50 times, but the roles rarely gave her a voice. Instead, she was placed in the margins. Maids wiping counters, slaves in the background, voodoo women warning of curses, housekeepers standing silently beside white leads. Her face became familiar, but her name didn't. She was cast in films that became legendary, but her presence in them was often reduced to a few seconds. In King Kong, one of the most iconic movies of its time, she played a handmaiden on Skull Island. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, she appeared at a wedding scene, once again wearing rags while others wore white gowns. In Hoodoo Ann, she played a palm reader. In Carmen Jones, decades into her career, she stood in the same frame as Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte, but remained uncredited. The point is, she was brought in to add atmosphere, to be part of the scene, but not the story. Her roles didn't have arcs. They didn't develop. She didn't get backstories or close-ups or a chance to show range. And still, she delivered. Her expressions, her body language, the way she entered a room even when she had no lines, she created energy. She gave weight to roles written as hollow. That was her quiet skill. You'd remember her even if the script didn't. There was one film, though, where her performance broke through. In Maid of Salem, she played Tituba, the enslaved woman accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. Tituba was a real historical figure, and for once the role had dimension, and Madame Sul-Te-Wan didn't disappoint, critics noticed. Film journals praised her for her authenticity, for her emotion, for her presence. For a brief moment, she got the recognition that had escaped her for years, but it was short-lived. Hollywood moved on. The scripts returned to what they were before. Most of the time, her characters didn't even have names. If you looked in the credits, she was listed as cook, maid, servant, old woman. Sometimes she wasn't listed at all. Her name might appear in the production notes, but not on the screen. And if it did appear, it was buried deep in the role, long after the audience had left the theater. She worked with actors who were celebrated in every magazine, photographed at every party. Stars like Dandridge, Belafonte, and Lillian Gish stood in the spotlight, while Madame Sul-Te-Wan held up the edges of the scene, never taking center. But she never left. She kept coming back, film after film, knowing full well what she was being offered and what she wasn't. These roles weren't neutral. They were built on stereotypes that helped shape the way America viewed black women. The characters she played were written to serve, to scare, or to stay silent. The system handed her scripts soaked in racism. She couldn't erase the lines, but she refused to disappear in them. She found moments to be real, to be grounded, to look at the camera with a gaze that said, "I'm still here." Even in scenes where her character had no voice, her performance said something. It said that she was paying attention, that she understood the power of showing up, again and again, even when the system tried to forget her, that she knew the camera could capture something more than the lines. She understood that being seen, even under the worst conditions, mattered. She stayed in the frame because disappearing would mean giving up everything she had worked for. The roles were limited, but her commitment wasn't. She didn't wait for the industry to treat her better. She forced her way into films that didn't know how to hold her, and by staying visible, she cracked open the door for the ones who came after. And while the white press ignored her, the black press saw something very different. An icon hiding in plain sight. A star in the black press, a legend in the community. Publications like the California Eagle followed her career with pride. Every new film role, no matter how small, was covered. When she was cast in Carmen Jones or Maid of Salem, it was treated as front-page-worthy news. Readers were reminded that one of their own had made it, not in the way Hollywood defined success, but in the way that mattered more, by staying in the fight. They didn't need her to be the lead actress. They understood how hard she had to work just to stay in the industry at all. They knew what it meant for a black woman to keep showing up on sets year after year while the rules of the game were never written for her. That persistence turned her into a cultural figure. Not a movie star in the traditional sense, but something deeper. A symbol of grit, legacy, and quiet rebellion. Her story was passed down in communities that had seen too many of their own overlooked. She became a reference point, someone you mentioned when you talked about black excellence in film before the world even knew what that phrase meant. In barbershops, churches, and living rooms, Madame Sul-Te-Wan was a name people said with respect. She didn't have agents spinning stories to the press. She didn't have publicists crafting magazine profiles. What she had were generations of black families who watched her do the impossible, survive Hollywood while being a black woman with no safety net, no privilege, and no permission. And while mainstream media reduced her to a silent presence in the background, the black press built her up as royalty. They wrote about her strength. They wrote about her artistry. They wrote about her motherhood. Because behind every camera shot was a real person, balancing art with survival, family with ambition. That love wasn't limited to the page. It stretched through generations. Her son, Honest Conley, followed her into the film industry. He took on roles, made a name for himself, and continued the path she had carved out long before there was room for people like them. He didn't just benefit from her name, he honored it. By working in the same space that tried to shrink her, he added another layer to her legacy. And that legacy wasn't just about film, it was about what she represented. There's something powerful about being remembered in the places that raised you. Madame Sul-Te-Wan might not have had a handprint in concrete or a star on Hollywood Boulevard, but her impact ran through the veins of the community that lifted her up. She didn't need the validation of the Walk of Fame when she had something far more real, generational recognition from people who understood exactly what it took for her to last as long as she did. You couldn't flip through a copy of the California Eagle without seeing her name pop up every few months. Sometimes it was a new movie role. Sometimes it was a community appearance. Sometimes it was just a reminder that she was still out there, still working, still showing up when most people would have walked away. Those mentions kept her legacy alive. They turned her into more than a film figure. She became part of the cultural fabric. She wasn't just that woman who stood in the back of a scene. She was the reason someone's grandmother believed their granddaughter could be in movies too. She was the reason a young black actor could imagine a career when no one in the mainstream would show them how. She was proof that you didn't have to be the headline to matter. You just had to keep going. And that's what she did. She kept going. That love carried her through her final years, where even age couldn't stop her from answering casting calls. Still working at 85, the final years. By the time most actors hit retirement age, they've either faded out quietly or chosen to walk away with their legacy intact. Madame Sul-Te-Wan didn't do either. She kept working, kept performing, kept answering the call whenever a role came her way. And not just in her 50s or 60s. She was still taking jobs at 85. She spent her final years at the Motion Picture Country home in Woodland Hills, a quiet residence for aging actors and film workers tucked away from the buzz of Hollywood. It was a place where people who had lived their entire lives on screen came to rest, share stories, and wait for the phone to ring one last time. But for her, the idea of slowing down didn't stick. She wasn't there to fade into the background. She still had more to give. Even at an age when most wouldn't dream of memorizing lines or enduring the long hours of a shoot, she stepped back on set. Her final role came in Tarzan and the Trappers, a television pilot that was supposed to kick off a new era of jungle adventures for the small screen. She was cast as a witch. Not a major part, but a role that fit the atmosphere of mystery and danger the show wanted to create. It might have looked small on paper, but for her, it meant everything. She didn't treat it like a throwaway gig. She showed up prepared, on time, in costume, fully present, the same way she had for decades. People half her age struggled to keep up with the demands of the job, but she came in like a professional, just as she always had. There were no complaints, no diva moments. She did the work. The industry had changed around her. The cameras were sleeker, the sound was crisp, and the scripts had evolved. But she adapted. She had lived through the silent film era, through black and white reels, through the introduction of sound, through the rise of color. She had watched generations of stars come and go, trends fade, studios rise and fall, and she still stood in front of the lens like she belonged there, because she did. Her career stretched across the lifespan of modern film itself. From the early 1910s to the mid-1950s, she kept herself relevant in a world that constantly tried to write her out. Most actors from the silent era never made the transition to talkies. They were left behind. Their styles didn't work anymore. Their names got lost, but not her. She adjusted. She didn't rely on nostalgia. She worked with what was new. And through it all, she never forgot where she came from. She carried the same grounded energy that had guided her since the first time she stepped on stage in Louisville. She didn't perform to chase attention. She performed because that's who she was. Acting wasn't a career move. It was her way of being. Her final appearance on camera might not have made headlines. The pilot didn't launch a major series. It didn't win awards or get reviewed in trade papers. But it was proof that even in her final year, she was still fighting for space on screen. That same fire she had as a teenager when she watched stage actresses rehearse while her mother folded laundry was still burning. She had built a life on persistence, and she never stopped. On February 1st, 1959, her story came to an end. She passed away quietly without the fanfare or recognition that so many of her peers had received. Hollywood didn't pause to reflect. There were no tributes, no televised memorials, no retrospective features. But the legacy was already in place, whether people saw it or not. She left behind a body of work that stretched across 5 decades, performances that helped define how Black women were seen on screen, even if the scripts never gave her the lines she deserved. She had been a bridge between silent films and modern cinema, between stage and screen, between invisibility and representation. Her influence wasn't fully understood when she died. Not by the studios, not by the industry that had kept her on the sidelines, but her name had been whispered across generations, in community papers, in family conversations, in the lives of young Black performers who had grown up seeing flashes of her on film. It would take nearly 3 decades after her death for the industry to finally say her name out loud. Buried quietly, remembered too late. If you walk through Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood, you'll see names that history made sure never disappeared. Amelia Earhart has a spot. Oliver Hardy rests nearby. The cemetery is filled with legends, some with grand tombs, others with polished plaques. But somewhere off the main path, a small, worn headstone lies mostly unnoticed. It reads, "Celebrated trailblazer and actress, devoted mother and grandmother, 1873 to 1959. That's it. No mention of her film career, no list of the 50-plus movies she appeared in. No sign that the woman buried there helped shape the future of black performers in American film. Madame Sul-Te-Wan didn't get the farewell she deserved. After working for over 5 decades in an industry that constantly made her invisible, even her final resting place struggled to honor what she'd done. She slipped away quietly, just as Hollywood had kept her. Quiet in the background, out of focus. And yet, she had stood next to some of the most iconic names in film history. She performed in The Birth of a Nation, King Kong, Imitation of Life, Maid of Salem, and Carmen Jones. She worked with D.W. Griffith, stood beside Dorothy Dandridge, and showed up in frames that would be studied in film classes for generations. Still, when the credits rolled, her name was either missing or pushed to the very end. It wasn't until 1986, 27 years after her death, that her name was finally lifted in recognition. That year, she was inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame. It was a long overdue honor, but she wasn't there to see it. The applause came too late. The spotlight finally swung her way, but the woman who earned it was no longer around to stand in it. Even today, Madame Sul-Te-Wan's name isn't widely known. Search engines pull up a handful of photos, a few scattered credits, and some articles that try to piece together the life she had to build in fragments. There's no biopic, no Hollywood Museum exhibit, no Lifetime Achievement Award, but for the ones who do find her story, something clicks. You realize she was the blueprint. Before there were red carpets for black actresses, before there were lead roles and Oscar speeches and fashion spreads, there was her. So, if you ever find yourself near the Burbank airport, take a walk through Valhalla. Look for the small headstone that most people miss, the one that doesn't scream for attention but still holds a history worth remembering. That's where Madame Sul-Te-Wan rests, not with fanfare, but with something stronger, legacy. And if this is your first time hearing her story, good. That means she's still reaching people, still showing up, still refusing to disappear. This has been the story of the first black woman to ever sign a Hollywood contract. The actress who survived 5 decades of typecasting, silence, and erasure. The mother, the fighter, the original. You know her name now. Say it again, Madame Sul-Te-Wan. And don't forget it. Like and subscribe for more.